Hey there. Seems like we're live. Hey there. Seems like we're live. Great. Now, if anyone has any questions or want to participate other than just watching the stream, the Discord link will be in the description. Just click that link, join the voice chat, and you should be able to just start viewing it. Start asking questions once we get past the first few questions. We should be starting in a few minutes.
Guys, we know that you can't unmute your mic, so in the session, if you have any doubt, you can always post your doubt, or if you have any question that you want to ask, you can post in the question section above or a discussion section above.
Hello, welcome to the stream. Sorry, my guy, I don't understand Russian. Just hello in Russian. Oh, I see. Is the sound okay? Can everyone hear? Yeah, this is on the stream side, I mean.
Well, I believe more people will be joining us during the course of this. But till then, I believe we can start with a little bit of introduction. So, well, firstly, I'm Alar. I'm part of the club of DMW Utopia, and I'm currently acting as its coding head. And with us here today, we have Steve. So, Steve, could you just give us a brief introduction about you?
Hello, I'm Steven. I'm a South African YouTuber, creator of the Steve's Teacher and Programmer Vibe YouTube channels, where I usually upload educational programming videos, generally based around game development, such as with Lua, or web development with HTML, CSS, and upcoming JavaScript.
Hmm. So, well, starting off on a little bit of the question side, I would ask, well, Lua is not a very common first language that a lot of people encounter. And, when coding comes to mind, people usually think C++, Java, or C. So, how did you come across it?
Well, after I finished learning Python, because Lua wasn't really my first language, but after I learned Python in 2020, right around the end of COVID, I was actually looking for a different programming language, something more around the lines of game development, because I heard that Lua or that Python wasn't really great for game development, and C++ itself was a little bit difficult for me to get used to before doing game development and whatnot. So I decided, let's search up for something else, something a bit easier to understand. And that's when I stumbled upon Lua. And it turns out Lua is amazing for game development. It has amazing libraries, and the amount of tutorials online are actually amazing as well. And not only that, if you go look at the documentation for most of the Lua libraries, is also great. And like Lua Rocks is amazing to just use. Like you don't see that in C++ or the Java community just being so easy. So that's kind of how I stumbled upon Lua. I was wanting to do game development at a better way than just using Go Dot and C++ and all of that. And I found Lua to be the best way in.
Even after using Lua ourselves, we came to the realization that the libraries are very well documented, and all its functions, its structuring, and the way that it works so efficiently is was always a plus point. But what all other languages did you find when you said that you saw game development? What all other languages did you also see aside from Lua?
Well, over the past 6 years or so, I've learned many programming languages, such as Nim, Python, C++, Dart, TypeScript, and the list just goes on. But I've learned a lot before actually stumbling upon Lua.
Now, this is a question that comes out as a programmer. Has it ever occurred to you whenever you do and go through multiple languages, there are those syntactical errors that start occurring because, say, a for loop in a particular language is not the same in the other? So, do you come across these?
Very, very, very often, yes. Because one time you just think, oh, I'm gonna write JavaScript, but then you're actually like in Lua or in Python, where it just doesn't work like that anymore, and you're using like syntax or syntax sugar like then or brackets and things like that, but it doesn't exist in the language you're writing.
Yes, that is indeed something that most of us have faced some point in our life. Well, another question for you. When did you come up with the idea of creating the course?
Well, I do already make a lot of programming courses. So Lua was just originally going to be another basic Lua course, just another basic course into programming. And that was just going to stay like that. I wasn't going to do any extra courses like game development or libraries or anything like that. But after just teaching the basics in a tutorial, I actually realized the language is so fun. So fun to write scripts in, so fun to work with. And I got so many positive reviews from my main Lua course after I released the full course that I decided I was going to continue on that and I was going to create game development videos and so on. And that actually just got more positive reviews. And that's actually just how I got into it. I just was first just going to release another basics course, like with most of my courses. They're just the basic introduction to get everyone, such as yourself, ready for working with the language.
Yes, Lua indeed has very vast, as we've come to realize. And I now thinking over it, how many courses per se were you able to make, and how deep were you able to go in Lua language with those courses? Because our audience would really want to know, considering they might even follow yours.
Could you rephrase that, please?
Um, it's more so that till what concept do you go to in those Lua courses? Because some of us here would have already seen them, and some of us would be willing to do so.
Yes. So basically, any concept I can find. It goes from the very basics, such as just teaching you how to work with numbers, all the way to working with data structures in Lua, how to use tables and arrays in object oriented programming, how to use functions in object oriented programming with tables. Anything I can find, any nice concept I can find, I will bring it into Lua. How to install libraries, how to use Lua on different operating systems. Anything Lua is basically going to be part of a course at some point.
Well, that's great to hear. And now that you've been working in Lua for a while, what all other applications have you seen for Lua?
Well, I've seen a lot of applications for Lua, primarily on my personal work. I've seen it a lot with C++ programs, where I see it getting called a lot into C++ with configuration files specifically, because I see a lot of my coworkers, they find Lua simple to understand as a configuration file. It's either that or JSON, but most people seem to be going for Lua. Other than that, I primarily see it in Roblox and more game development around there, especially with Love 2D. There's a ton of games that get released every year with Love 2D in mind, where Lua was just the main part of that game. But yeah, that's about it. I didn't see it too often in other places, but I have also seen it in places like web development where it runs a few servers and whatnot. But primarily, I see it in game development and as configuration files.
So it's more so in an embedded fashion that they're calling for Lua so that as to maybe smoothen out the work or ease the workflow.
Yes, because a lot of people they would also rather learn something like Lua instead of going for something difficult or a little bit more difficult like C++. Because Lua is so much, it's so easy. If you have like a day, you could probably learn most of the language and be comfortable with it.
Now, Would you recommend Lua as a language that, people who have not started coding to start with? Is it per se that forgiving?
Yes, if you have never done any programming whatsoever in the past, Lua is still perfect for you. I think it's either that or Python when I have to guess about the best first programming language. But even then, I think Lua might even be better than Python because it is a lot simpler. It takes a lot of concepts and it converts it into something a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to digest. And I think even with Python, it's a little bloated. So there's a lot more to take in, like module installation. That is a very big thing in Python, but it's not really that big in Lua. You can do it, but a lot of times you'll just rather write out your own piece of code. Or if you want to do something like game development, where in Python that's going to be a little bit more difficult, or it will be a little bit slower, so you can't really make bigger games with it, and so on. So definitely, as a first programming language, I'd say Lua is one of the top three best languages to learn. Because even if you learn it, unlike with a lot of other easy programming languages, with Lua you can still find work if you want to get into like work with Lua, like as an actual income. You can still do that with Lua.
I believe Lua would also. What is your perspective? Does it feel like something that an indie game developing studio would use, considering how quick you're able to make things on it and develop on the same?
Well, an indie game studio probably they would use Lua, but I don't think they will use it in the long term. They might still use it as embedded into their other languages they use, but I don't think they'll use just Lua for forever. Maybe unless they stay with smaller or more basic games, then I think Lua would be what they stay with. But if they go for something a bit more complex, like let's say a 3D environment game or something like that, they'd probably rather go with like Unity or Unreal Engine for something that can do a lot more workload for them. But they could still use Lua on the side as an extra scripting language to, in case something is a bit too difficult to write in C sharp or C++, then they can just call Lua instead, and that could do something for them that might be a bit easier.
Okay. Um, just another reminder for the audience. In case you guys have any questions, I would suggest you put them in the questions chat of sessions, and we will then allow you to unmute and ask the question personally. Till then, on to a more generic topic. What would be a few tips that you would give to someone who's just starting out coding? Because currently, a lot of people in chat here are freshers, and they probably have never heard of the term.
Well, tips I would give is definitely don't spend too much time on one topic. A lot of my friends and a lot of my coworkers I always see they would spend days or hours and or even sometimes weeks on one topic that overall isn't that important. But they think because this is one topic that they won't understand, they can't continue. A lot of times, if you don't understand one topic, jump over to the next topic. And once you're done with that, go back and take a look at that topic you didn't understand, because there's a chance if you just put some break room between what you did learn or what you wanted to learn but you didn't, and you go back to it later, you might understand it better because you just developed better once you learn more about language. Other than that, I definitely say Google and YouTube are your best friends. If you have a question, Google it or YouTube it, because 99% of the time someone else had that question and they went and posted it on a forum on Google, and you can go read up what was the answer to that question, and they might even give you more tips along with that question, like Stack Overflow. A lot of times you'll see that pop up if you have a question on programming. And then it's finally fix something with programming. If you want to learn to code, and the best way to do that is to get to a project. But a lot of times you don't know what project to do. Now, if you're just getting into programming, I would definitely recommend finding a problem, any sort of problem that might annoy you or someone else, and fixing it with code. For example, when I just got into programming, my laptop that I used was so slow I couldn't code and listen to music on YouTube at the same time with my laptop. And that annoyed me. So I decided to make a very lightweight background music player in C++, later on switched to NIM. But I did that, and that taught me so much, not only about programming, but about the language I wrote it in. Same with when Trello got a little bit too expensive for my liking, and I decided to make my own version of Trello. It's still busy, but I've learned so much from it. How to manipulate elements in, if you're a web developer, how to manipulate elements so you can move around and whatnot. So definitely, if you're new to programming, find a project and do it. Even if you're not good in it, even if you only have like a few hours of experience in that language, find a nice little project you can do. So to shorten it up, basically don't spend too much time on one topic. For example, if you're struggling with the math operations in Lua, you don't know if it's plus or times first. Skip it, go to the next topic, whatever it may be. That might be if statements. Then once you're done with if statements, go back to that topic and you might be a bit better knowing what's happening. Second of all, Google it if you have a question. And third of all, if you have a problem or if you see someone else has a problem, try to fix it with that programming language you're trying to learn. Even if it sounds super difficult, chances are once you've done it, you've gained so much knowledge that the next project you're going to do is going to be super easy to do.
Well, that's great to hear. Now, Atharva Deshpande here has a question for you, so I'm just going to unmute him. Atharva, you can ask your question directly. See if you can unmute now. Hmm. Perhaps he is having issues unmuting. Well, since he's not able to unmute, I'll ask the question myself. He's asking how if we start with C plus plus given that yeah. How will we start with C plus plus if he already knows C programming? Maybe he's asking if it would be an advantage for him.
So just to make sure I understand, if he already knows C, should he be learning C++? Is that about what he's
Yes.
asking? Well,
Yes.
I'd say yes. If you know C, then definitely learn C++ because chances are you're most likely going to find a job that wants you to do C++. But having the underlying knowledge of C, working with pointers and manually managing your memory, is a great way to kind of bump up your skill. And if you already know C, then you already know like at least 60 to 70% of C++. Because C++ is, or the idea around it was to be C, but extended upon. So it has classes and it has strings and things like that. So if you know C already, definitely learn C++ as well, because I don't see any downside in learning C++ as well.
Well, Atharva, I hope that clears out your question. If in case it's not, you can ask a more precise one in the chat. Uh, Devil Hunter here had another question. If I want to get into game dev, should I start with Lua or directly with Unity?
That kind of depends. If you have no prior experience, I might recommend Lua first because it's going to be easier. It's going to be simpler to just get into programming and know what to do because Love 2D is a great library and I recommend you use that. But if you want to just jump, if you already know like a bit about programming, then jumping into Unity or Unreal or Godot or whichever other engine would be a better idea. It's primarily just what type of games do you want to make. Do you want to make more basic 2D games? Then I would definitely recommend Love 2D, or at least to get started with it, definitely Love 2D, aka Lua. But if you want to jump in and you want to start working on bigger projects, something that's going to be more complex, and you already know a little bit about programming, then I'd say go for a game engine instead.
Well, he elaborating on his question, he said if he wants to use it for 2D.
For
Right.
2D, then I would definitely see. Then it's a kind of an even playing field. I'd say definitely start out with Love 2D, aka Lua, or you don't necessarily have to use Love 2D, but that's one I find to be the easiest. And then see how you like it. If you don't like it, try to jump over to a game engine instead. If and vice versa. So if you want to start with a game engine first, then you can jump over to whichever you prefer. And Yeah, so it doesn't really. It's a bit more complex to answer that one because if it's 2D, then it's on a more even playing field. But let's say if you want to use a game engine, then you should expect the game engine would be willing to do a little bit more for you. So it's going to take a little bit of work off of your hands, and you're going to have to do a little bit less work. Where with Love 2D, you're going to have to do a little bit more work because there's not going to be a game engine to import images for you and to put it on a screen for you. There's not going to be a drag and drop system where you can create a level by just dragging and dropping stuff. So you're going to have to decide for yourself. Is it better to instead have a game engine that will make it a little bit easier or a little bit less effort, or would it be better to instead use something a bit easier to get started with, such as Lua?
Yeah, okay. So I understood that. My another question was that what is the extent of Lua? Like, can I make 3D games and bigger games on Lua, or is it not possible? I have to shift to Unity to make those games.
You can definitely make 3D games in Lua. There's Love VR as an example, which is very similar to Love 2D, but it's for VR games, which already shows that you can make like really good games, like really big games, like for VR, but with Lua. And there's also a few libraries that are similar to Love 2D, but for 3D game development. I don't know how well they're developed yet, but I'm assuming some of them would be developed enough to use it. And I think it's on the Love 2D website itself. You can just look at the Love 2D or Love 3D as an alternative. But yeah, you can definitely make 3D games in Lua if you want to. But I believe once it gets to 3D games, it's going to become a lot more difficult to do it, and it's going to become a lot more complex. So then I would maybe recommend jumping over to something like Unity instead. Unless you want to get like raw experience, then I might recommend Lua because that's going to basically let you do what the engine would have done for you. So you're going to learn what's the engine doing in the background to make something work, which could be a good learning experience.
I believe Tejaswin
Uh,
also had another question. Uh, yeah, you can unmute yourself, Tejaswin.
Okay, yep. Hey, Steve. Nice meeting you.
Thanks, you too.
So my question was, yeah. So, what would be the one most important advice you would probably give to any new, maybe game dev enthusiast or tech enthusiast who wants to contribute to this community, either as a educator or instructor like yourself, or either as a blogger or through any other means? What would be that one uh, advice that you'd probably give to that enthusiast?
Well, I'd say prepare. Just be sure to have preparations. Because you'll notice, at least with my earlier videos, you'll notice I'm not very prepared, and that in turn made that other people didn't quite understand what I meant when I taught my videos. So definitely be prepared. And other than that, I would just say start with it. A lot of people say they want to start teaching other people, they want to start helping people by writing blogs or making videos. But the problem is a lot of times, and I mean a lot of times, they just never start with it. They always say they want to start with it. So I'd say get your foot in the ground, even if you're not very prepared, just first start with it. And other than that, you'll kind of see it's not that difficult. It's you're basically just reteaching yourself, and that in turn teaches someone else.
Okay, that was that was interesting. Okay, thank you.
We do have another question. This question is, well, I would say Blacking. You can unmute yourself and just ask yourself. Hmm. Perhaps he is having issues with the same. Now, the question that he's asking is, what do big game development companies such as Rockstar, Ubisoft, which programming language do they actually use?
Well, I can't quite confirm it because I've never worked at one of these places. But if I had to guess, I definitely say either C sharp because Unity uses it, or definitely C++ because that will give very good performance. and I think Unreal Engine uses that. So it depends on what engine they're using to build these games, but I'd say it's kind of between C sharp and C++. plus plus.
Well, actually, adding on to that, we had the opportunity to speak with a few people at Ubisoft, and they do use CryEngine, which incidentally also uses Lua.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. Now, well, I think someone else is typing another question. Till then, I heard you mention Love VR, so we too incidentally found it a while back, but there were some pros and cons that we felt. So, what do you think are like the primary differences you would find between Unity and Love VR when comparing 3D?
Well, this is more difficult since I didn't have a lot of experience specifically with Love VR. I've only dabbled with Love 2D as my primary source of uh, game development, and then a little bit with the other game engines. But that's a bit more difficult. I'd say Love VR is probably this take this with a grain of salt because I have not yet used it. Love VR specifically is VR only, if I had to guess, where with Unity you have more variety. And in terms of VR with VR, I'd say Unity again probably just removes a lot of the extra work you would have done. So you can drag and drop things into your world instead of having to first create an object, then you have to import it into Lua and you have to tell that object how it should be up, where it should be in Lua, how it should appear in Lua, and whatnot. Unlike with Unity, where most of the things are going to be dragged and dropped in, unless programmed in at a later date.
So, now that another question arises, that actually, let's first clear Atharva's question. You can actually unmute and ask it yourself. See if it's possible now, Atharva. Hmm.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, my question was that how should a language be learned? Should it be learned in a practical approach, like write programs and then learn the concepts like what are arrays, what are pointers, and all this? Or first, should we read a book and try to know what are pointers and arrays and then write a program based on it? So, which approach is much better and we can learn it easily, according to you?
Well, that highly depends from person to person. I can't give one answer that will work for everyone. But for me, at least, what worked for me is I would learn the programming itself. For example, let's say I'm learning pointers. Then I'll watch the tutorial on pointers and I'll watch how you use it. I'll code along and maybe I'll try afterwards to code something myself using that concept. Uh, but if I don't understand it, even after watching that tutorial, then I would go and maybe read a book about it, read a blog about it, watch more tutorials about it. But for me, it's the practical part about doing it while learning that really helps me. But for everyone else, it might be something different.
Okay, thank you so much for giving a clear solution.
Yep. I think that clears it out. Now, now let's see that Love Today and Lua have a massive community, and I'm part of both the Discord servers myself. I came to see that there's a lot of support for it, and the support is constantly increasing. People coming up with new libraries, and even Lua updating itself with newer functions. But doesn't it start becoming an issue when older functionality gets depreciated?
It definitely does become an issue, but it's also something you can't really avoid. It just is going to be an issue in the future because I know with with Lua version 4 going up to Lua version 5, there's a lot of issues between those two versions, so they're not as compatible as you'd wish they were. But again, you don't want everything to just be backwards compatible with all of its previous versions, so still have all of the functions and whatnot, because then you'll get a programming language or library that has all of these very old functions and very old functionality and never actually evolves. So it does definitely become a problem, and the best way I can really say it is to update your code to work with the newer solutions, work with the newer version. For example, if you used Python 2, back in the past and you now want to switch your project over to Python 3, you can't just go and run with Python 3 because that project won't run, since Python 2 has very different syntax to Python 3, which is breaking changes. So you will unfortunately have to manually go and fix those bugs, or you'll have to stay with the older version, which will no longer be given security patches uh, and extra features and things like that.
Um, so now that you take it as an example, have you faced this before? The problem of having to work out a version, on a new version that has just been released, and functionality is not the same.
Yes, I have definitely encountered that. I believe it was with Meteor.js, which is a JavaScript library that can work with React and Svelte and other JavaScript libraries. When I version bumped it from one version to another, there was a bunch of things that broke because for some reason the two versions didn't really mix with each other, and that actually forced me to go through the entire project, fix everything that didn't work. Very, very cumbersome, and didn't like it at all.
Well, I don't think anyone would.
And
Now,
also, one thing I would like to add, like you guys can ask doubts or any questions related to other platform also. It's not necessary that you have to ask for game development. You can ask for web or app also. Like it's fine.
yep. Also, heading on to those questions. Now, this is more of a personal question on how you manage things. Considering that you have done web dev, game dev, like, probably CPP at some point, Python. How do you manage all this? Like,
Well, I primarily am a language enthusiast, which means that I would learn a ton of languages in a short time and learn more about their concepts. But what I do primarily is I learn a language. If I like the language, I'll use it in a project. If I still like the language after that project, I'll use that language on a regular basis so I don't ever forget it. And examples of this can be Nim, TypeScript, and Lua. I use them regularly because I never want to forget them because they're really, really good languages. But with languages that I don't like as much or feel like it's a little bit too much effort, for me that would be Go, Pascal, and Java. I don't really like those languages that much. I would learn them and I might do one project with them, but if I don't, I can't just leave them, and over time my skills will deteriorate. If I feel my skills have gotten too low, I would relearn the language, which is usually a bit faster than having to learn it from scratch again. And that's kind of what I will do because over the last about 6 years, I've learned 13 programming languages, 6 libraries and frameworks, and about 3 database management systems, which definitely it does have its trouble being keeping track of it. For example, the other day I learned Rust. I can barely remember anything from it because I didn't do anything with it. So what I would do is before I do a tutorial or something like that is I would just relearn the concept, just refresh my memory, and maybe do a project in it just to bump up my skill a little bit. But overall, I'd say I'm a jack of all trades, so I can do a language, but I'm not going to be good in that language unless it's one of my top 5 programming languages. So I'd say keep like a list of like 3 or 5 languages you focus on, and then let the rest kind of just flow by you if you're into something like that.
hmm, well, that would be something to keep in mind. And I heard you talk about NEM. Well, I don't think that's a language that most of us here have heard of. Could you like tell us a little bit about it?
So Nim is a language very similar to Python in terms of syntax. However, I like to see Nim as Python but statically typed. So for those of you who don't know, you have dynamically typed programming languages and statically typed. Where dynamically typed programming languages is you'll declare a variable, so just a little container that will hold something, and you say that is equal to this word or that is equal to this number. Whereas a statically typed programming language like Nim, you'll have a variable and you'll say this variable is a piece of text and it is equal to this, or this variable is a number and it is equal to this. Slight difference, but in one you specify the type it should be. For example, a piece of text or a number, meaning later on you can't change it and that's just how it's going to stay. So Nim is kind of like Python but with types, and it also has a lot of features that like comes with with it, such as it can compile down to, I believe, C++, JavaScript, and I think C as well. So it has that nice feature of if you want to do something, but you need to do it in a specific language, you can quickly do it in NIM, compile it down to that language you need, and then you will have it in that little box.
Hmm. We had another question from the audience. Apur wanted to know uh, if you know about the Teal language. Teal. T-E-A-L.
Oh, Teal. Uh, well, yes, I do know actually about it. A tutorial will be coming out on that soon. It's a really nice language. It's basically like you have JavaScript and you have TypeScript, which is like uh, JavaScript but with types, just like NIM is Python but with types, and Teal is that but with Lua. And I love Teal so much because it really does add order to your code. Definitely, Teal is one of my recommendations if you ever want to learn a statically typed programming language.
Hmm. Well, I, again, there are a lot of new terms, and sometimes it just becomes so overwhelming. How do you keep track of what all languages you've done at this point?
I've made a GitHub and I just like put all of the languages I've learned on there. Whenever someone asks me, I just open up the GitHub and say, "Oh yeah, I remember this language," because after like my top 5 languages, I just don't remember any of them.
That is true. It can be cumbersome to actually know so many. I can only imagine. And I feel like you're a great, per se, you really campaign for developing projects while learning languages. And do you think that is the most effective strategy to learn something by just working on a project with it?
Yes, 100%. That is what I stand by. I feel like no matter how you learn, if you're going to do a project in a specific language, you are going to learn so much more than if you were to just focus on following a tutorial, then say you're done, and then moving on to the next big thing. Definitely do a project if you want to learn how to code, because doing a project will teach you so much because you're teaching yourself. By, let's say, you're making a website, and this website, it needs to be able to call someone. Now that is not something that's very common. You don't call someone from a website that often, but that is something you can teach yourself. Or if you get a Raspberry Pi, which is like a very small computer that you can like do very cool things on, and you want to like install security cameras in your house, you can use Python or JavaScript or Lua, whatever, to code into that Raspberry Pi to work with a camera or something like that, and it maybe notify you if something's happening around your house and you can view what's happening because you teach yourself how to do that. Of course, you can go Google search it, and that is what I recommend. Search it up, and then you'll learn. Oh, okay, that's what you do. For example, when I decided to learn NIM, I decided to make one of my first project is a new trash app, because on Linux you have this trash CLI app, which when you run it, it moves your items to your trash bin. But on my specific operating system, it just didn't work. So I decided I'm going to code my own version, and I learned so much, not only about NIM, but about how computers work and what happens when you move something to the trash. It doesn't really do much. So it really teaches you about the concept you're trying to code about, as well as the language. So it's one of the best ways to learn if you want to learn a programming language.
We have another question from the audience. So once I God wants to ask, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Oh, hello. Hi. Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. So my question is more related to the reason why I want to learn Lua is because it's used in one of the online video games that I play called Elder Scrolls Online. It's used as a programming language for the add-ons that are involved within that game. Now, my question is because I'm new from coding. There's already some coders that are coding within that interface. They have learned Lua, but they also have other background of coding. And there's a lot of problems to solve within the game that they use, like arrays and I guess different databases and stuff. I'm wondering, when it comes to having the biggest toolbit possible for coding add-ons with Lua, do I have to learn more of the API as well as the terms the game is using? Or would it be more embedded into understanding everything that Lua can use as tools? So, in other words, I'm asking, um, how much of programming do I need to know just from Lua compared to how much of the notations from the game that comes?
Well, whenever you like try to add a mod to a game, or when you try to create an add-on or anything like that for a game, most of the time, if you just know the basics of the programming language, then you're going to spend most of your time learning about adding add-ons to the game. So, for example, let's say you have a mine test, which is like a Minecraft, but with use, it's very easy to add to it. It's very moddable. And with that, if you know what is used again, I think it uses Python, or it might actually use Lua. But if you already know Lua, then you're good to go with that. But you're going to spend most of the time trying to figure out how does this game interface with the language. So the API part is basically going to take the most time to get used to and to learn, if that answers your question.
Mm, well, I guess it does, considering there is no response. Now, here's something on a bit of a lighter note. How many, how often do you find yourself visiting Stack Overflow? Because it's been somewhat of a joke among programmers that, whenever you find yourself in an issue, you just go to Stack Overflow, Control C, Control V. And
Yes, that's a daily occurrence, sometimes even hourly. Just when you have an issue, just Google and that's the first pop up. Definitely Stack Overflow is the daily thing.
and usually, how accurate is it?
That generally depends on the language. With popular languages such as JavaScript, it is usually very accurate and gives you the answer immediately. You just copy paste, do a little bit of modification, and you're good to go. But with less popular languages such as Kotlin, if you try and search something up and you find it on Stack Overflow, chances are it's either not going to have an answer, or the answer it's going to have is very, very, very specific to that specific user's use case, and you can't quite use it on your end. So it definitely depends on the popularity of the language. In terms of Lua, I'd say it's somewhere in between. It's not really as popular that all of the answers are just going to work out of the box like with JavaScript, and I believe Java is probably going to be one of them as well. But it's not quite that unpopular that you won't be able to just find your answers and you're going to have to find some other place. So it's definitely like in the middle. So Stack Overflow will probably have answers, but it will probably only work, let's say, 60 to 70% of the time, depending on what you're trying to do.
So it's more so like their answer's all right, but maybe not the ones I asked.
Yeah.
Well, now this is more of a personal question that I came across when I was coding for Lua. I realized that it does not have a direct connection with database management, such as MySQL. And do you see like support coming for the same in the future?
Sorry, can you please repeat that last part?
So now, considering that currently Lua does not possess direct support, direct integration with the MySQL service, you can't directly communicate through the interface. So, do you think that we're gonna get support for the same, considering the rising popularity of Lua?
Mm, I don't think you'll get direct support from Lua with that. I think you'd still have to install some sort of library to interface with MySQL or MongoDB or whichever database management system you want to use. But I don't think Lua itself will implement that feature so anyone can just connect to a database just using a regular Lua. Because I think the idea behind Lua is it's very basic, but it's very expandable. So I don't think they want to add so many new features, they just want to improve the features they already have.
Hmm. Well, another question that most actually a lot of people would have in our uh, club is how important do you think mastery over data structures and algorithms is required in game
Mm,
for working out little details inside it?
Well, I'd say it is important to be relatively good with it, but specifically coming more from a web development standpoint rather than a game development one. Uh, but it's yeah, actually it's kind of maybe from both. But I'd say definitely about data structures, you're going to have to be very good, no matter what language it is or what job it is. Data structures, you're going to have to basically master it. It's going to be very important. Know about arrays, know about tables, know about any sort of data structure you can. But with algorithms, personally, with my experience, I found that most realistically, you're going to Google it. And the only real time that you're going to need to know it at the top of your head is in exams and during programming interviews. But 99% of the other time, I don't know it and I just Google the algorithms. But for things such as a data structure specifically, you're going to have to know that. Unfortunately, that's not something you can just Google if you want to be very good with it.
Now, is it actually worth the trouble to go through all languages and their specific data structures? Such as an example being now C++ has its own, you can create whatever data structure you want, and if already has its own arrays, it already has its own structures. So, and if you look at the difference, on the other hand, Lua has a all-encompassing table. So, is it actually worth the effort to go through these obscure languages and their data structures also, or do you just need a general idea?
I think just a general idea would probably help you. If you know the data structures very well of one language, it's going to almost uh, kind of guide you everywhere. For example, if you know what an array is, then you know what an array is in 99% of programming languages, and you know it's one function that the table will have. If you know what a table is, then you know what an array is in basically 99% of other programming languages, as well as what an object is in JavaScript and C++ and things like that. So I think just having a general idea of, or just knowing about one language, having known that data structure will help you in basically everything else. So then you only need the general idea about everything else because they're all going to work very similar or be very close to each other.
Another question. Since you're probably very much used to JavaScript, how often have you actually tried coding in it for game development purposes?
Yes, I have. When I like just started with JavaScript, I did try and code with using the canvas in JavaScript for game development. It wasn't the best experience, in my opinion. It was actually my first attempt at trying to, or my second attempt at trying to code a game in a language. So it wasn't really that great. I would not really do it ever again, but I did try it, and there is that option if you're ever interested in it.
Well, clearly something for if someone wants to take a really brutal part down there. Now, another thing. So, since you already developed courses on your own YouTube channel, how did the free code camp come into picture?
So when I left, or rather when I was in high school, I decided to learn about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, where Free Code Camp is most popular for. And around the time of COVID, I discovered Free Code Camp. And that is when I was like, wow, it's actually a really good place to learn how to code. Because up until then, I've been using sources like Solo Learn and some YouTube videos to learn JavaScript specifically. But I would never say that my skill back then was very good. In fact, I was about to completely leave JavaScript to instead learn a different language such as Python because my skill just wasn't really good with JavaScript. And then that's when Free Code Camp came into play. That is where I kind of met Free Code Camp. And I used their JavaScript uh, course to teach myself JavaScript with, and it was mind blowingly good. It gave me enough skill to actually land a job with it. That's actually how good it was. And it was also about around that time when we started talking, me and Free Code Camp, that is.
Well, I guess from disciple to teacher.
Yes.
Now, well, coming to the end of here, I wonder if the audience have any questions regarding the same. Um, Anyone who has any particular doubt, you can just unmute yourself. Well, by judging by the silence, I think they understood it quite well. And really, thank you for sharing all of this because, again, we are just a few of us freshers, some third years, some second years, and a whole bunch of mixed. And we don't really have that much exposure to what it's like after you're done graduating. And this clears out a lot of doubts, be it for a beginner or someone who's already working in multiple languages.
Hey, I'm happy I
So,
could help.
yep, really thank you for this session. And yeah, I think that we can end it for today.
Yes, no one on the live stream that maybe have any questions? I'll take maybe a minute to give anyone here who has a question to maybe send it. Will there be web-based game development? It's probably talking about a course. Yeah, there will possibly be a game development course written in web-based languages. I might try to maybe do some JavaScript Canvas courses in the future. However, don't get your hopes up, because primarily with web dev, game dev, I wouldn't say those two don't mix that well with me, at least. Alright, and I assume that's all of the questions on the live stream end.
Yeah, there is, I think, one last question that Atharva is typing. Um, I mean, Atharva, you can just mute and ask it yourself. So that
Hello,
also works.
Steve. I had a question.
Oh,
Can
yeah,
I?
Karthik, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to ask, how good of a career is of a game developer? Like, I was thinking of exploring that domain. So, how good of a career I can make in game development?
Well, that depends on your perspective. I've not really made a career for myself in game development, but from what I hear, if you are okay with hectic hours of work and uh, okay pay, not like the top of the line sort of pay, then it's definitely a good way to go in. However, I would personally recommend maybe going into something such as web development or software development instead. But if you are set on the game development, then there is definitely a market for more game developers. Especially if you can maybe start your own indie company and make a name for yourself, then getting into a company that will want like a bigger company, like I don't know any game development companies, but if you get into a company like that, it will be much easier if you have like a little portfolio you can show them. But just take note that game development does take a lot of time, and you're going to have to be very dedicated for it.
Well,
Oh, that answers my question. Thank you.
yeah, there was another by Atharva, but I think even I could answer this one. He does indeed upload videos on YouTube, and yes, Steve, could you actually put your link to your YouTube channel here so that people who want they can just go and view your videos?
Yes, I shall put it in the. If I can just move the screen away. So put it in the discussions tab for anyone who wants
Yep.
to maybe go.
Yep. That should be visible to all. And yes, with that we come to the end of the session. So any few people who have a question, you may stay back, and if not, you're free to go. Um, as for members of game dev, I suggest we move to the general channel. Uh, Steve, would you join us for a little bit of a group photograph? We'll all just turn on our videos and I can have a little photo
Sure.
commemorate this. So yeah, game dev members, if all of you can just move to the general chat. Yeah, they've started to move. So, guys, if everyone can just turn on your camera, so we can have like a little photo with Steve. Harsh and Aman, we really can't quite see your. Yeah, Aman. Maybe there's